Tania Craan is a graphic designer who specializes in book design and has done so for how long?
I've been a freelancer for 30, and so I would think over 40 years.
And so you started off at Sheridan College.
I studied illustration, and in those days, in the early 80s, by the time you got to third year, you had to specialize. You had to major in one and minor in something else. And I majored in book, and I minored in editorial illustration.
What's the difference?
Editorial, is magazines. But I was fortunate enough doing book. Our main teacher was Frank Neufeld.
The famed Frank Neufeld.
That's it, yes. Famous for many things. And he was also a designer. And he didn't just teach illustration. We had to understand books to be a book illustrator. And we worked really hard with him. One of our main end of the year project was to create our own book from start to finish.
So not just the illustration?
Not just the illustration. We didn't have to write the book. We could find a story that appealed to us, but we had to illustrate it. We had to prepare the files. We had to do typesetting, and then actually physically bind some hardcover books for the project, which was you learn a lot that way.
Yeah.
And the other thing that Sheridan used to do is we used to have an internship in third year, and they would put the book students in publishing houses. And this is the day before computers, where people were typesetting and we were pasting up pages. So we would go in there for 3 or 4 weeks, and we would see what it was like to work in a publishing house.
Which one did you go into?
They're no longer around, but it's a Cop Clark.
Yeah. Long history.
They were around downtown Toronto. It was really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we graduated, a lot of these publishers would hire us because they needed people to do some paste up. And I got hired there were 2 other students.
Mm-hmm.
We went to Nelson Canada, the educational publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned a lot there because not only did they design, but they commissioned artwork. So we learned to work with illustrators, commissioning photography and illustration, and on top of that, designing books. And that was sort of what pushed us into becoming more book designers and illustrators. And then I applied for a job at Penguin Books Canada, and it was the first time they wanted an in-house person. So I applied, I got the position. Once again, learned a whole lot because I was the only person there.
What'd you learn?
I had to do everything myself. I had to work with the freelancers. I had to commission it. I had to be the point person. I had a boss. That was the production person who managed everything. Getting files ready for printers, learning all the just confidence to do these things on my own. Mm-hmm. And then also learning how to navigate with editors and marketing people. That was when Morty Mint was the president, and Cynthia Good was the editor-in-chief, I guess you would call her. Mm-hmm. So real strong personalities, and I'm early 20s, right?
Sure.
Learning how to have the confidence to work with people with strong personalities like that. And it was great. Learned a lot.
What was their input and what was your input?
I would get a project, and let's say it's a cover. I can remember one of the first big ones was an Ann Tyler cover that it was the Canadian version.
They got the Canadian rights.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
So we had to do a Canadian paperback version, and I would be given the job, and I would have to come up with ideas. I'd come up with comps to show them, and then I would work with Cynthia because she was the first person I would deal with. But at some point, I would have to go in a room with the marketing people and would have to show them, and they'd say, well, we don't like the type, or we don't like this, and you got to go back and change it and work till you finally got something that was approved. And then once it's approved, then you do
Did you push for stuff that you thought was right? Or did they just say, no, we don't like that, we want this?
Well, I didn't have the confidence at that time.
Okay.
I was really learning. And
sure.
But there came a point when I wanted to move on, and there was a job opening at McClelland and Stewart.
Now, what year was that? Roughly.
I would say late 80s, some maybe
late
80, 87, 88 maybe. And there was an art director there, and his name was Rick Miller. And that was also the time where Adrian Clarkson was brought in. Abby Bennett had purchased the company.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of chiefs at the top. So not only there was Doug Gibson, Alan Seligman.
Doug was he the publisher? He had his own imprint.
I think he had his own imprint. And
Yeah.
Ellen was, she's highly regarded even back then, and she was like, I don't know the exact positions, but she was one of the top editors.
Okay.
And Adrian was, I don't know what her name was, what her title was. And then there was Abby Bennett.
She wasn't there that long.
No,
though.
she wasn't.
Like a year maybe, or
a
2?
year and a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I got in there under an art director, so I was kind of protected for a while.
From all of the shrapnel and...
That's right.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. But then Rick, he left.
Did he stay in the business, or...?
I think he was slowing down, and he had enough.
Yeah.
And I think he has it. Back then, he had a small printing press, and he just wanted to go back and focus on that. So he left, and they didn't have an art director. And for some reason, I said, "Could I be?" And I said,
some ambitious reason.
I don't know. I wasn't even thinking straight, I guess. And they let me do it. And so once again, I was pushed into responsibilities. Maybe I didn't have as much confidence, but it was exciting. It was exciting to be at M&S. They were the biggest publisher at the time in Canada, and there was an energy about the place.
So that's what almost everyone I've talked to who worked there has said.
Yeah.
Not just in the late 80s, obviously, but going back to the 40s.
Yes. But I think things started to change probably in the late 80s to 90s when...
Meaning?
Well, Abby Bennett was running it, and it had to start making money,
So he cut things back, or not?
I don't know. There was also a time where people were paying a lot of money to authors.
Advances?
Advances, yeah. And then also with Adrian Clarkson there, I don't know exactly everything, but, things were starting to change at M&S.
What does that mean, though?
I think, I have to be careful. I'm not 100% sure, but they weren't spending as much money as they used to spend, And
Why'd you have to be careful?
well, you were on a budget always.
No, but why do you have to be careful talking to me?
Because I don't always know whether I'm 100% sure of what I remember 30 years ago.
Okay.
That's pretty much. I don't want to say something that was
wrong.
Wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
Wrong. So
Understood.
Yeah. But we know. Once again, I had my bosses, different kinds of bosses. I had the production manager. I had Doug Gibson. I had Adrian Clarkson. At M&S, the number of books all of a sudden jumped from a handful. I was managing over 50 to 80 books a year. So yeah, there was a lot of work to do. So every season, I don't know how many seasons we had back then. Now, this day and age, when we have 2, we have spring.
Fall and spring.
Yeah, I think we had maybe another one in the winter. We used to have a winter one.
Okay.
When we used to publish more paperback books, but there was always a cycle that we were working on.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were all kinds of the authors, M&S had all the big names, whether it be Margaret Atwood or Pierre Burton or, Ken Dryden at one time, The Game and all the big guys. And the art department was so visual. They always brought, when the authors came in for a tour, or came in for a meeting, and they wanted to show them the office, you'd walk around, and they always end up in the art department because there were things to look at. There was a wall where we would put up all the comps for the covers that were coming up. So there was a place to have a conversation. So you got to meet all these big people. That was the fun part of working at M&S is meeting all the famous authors, and even not the famous authors, but there was always someone around. Yeah, it's exciting.
And what about actually working with these authors? Did you do much of that? Like did they?
I'm not the point person. Usually the designer, art director is not the point person. They usually talk to the editor, or even then maybe the production person. But usually the editor is the person that
would present your work.
Yeah, well, would be the person that spoke to the author. So if we had things to consider, the editor would say, well, we can use Pierre Berton as an example. Pierre Berton had particular things that he wanted in all his books. Like he wanted a particular point size for the text because he assumed that his audience was older and required a larger point size. So it was a little larger than we normally. So he insisted on that. He insisted on certain things for his covers. He always liked foil, like gold foil, silver foil, whatever it was, we had to have it on.
Regal.
Yes. And there was a trim size. I think it was a 6x9. You know, he had particular ways of. So we would get that information passed on to us. And some authors have the right to veto a cover design, and some of them don't. So
because of the amount of books they sell, I guess that's the determining. Okay.
Yeah.
So he would obviously have a lot of sway.
Yes. Total, 100%.
Okay.
And
anyone else? Farley Mowat, would he?
He wasn't like Pierre Berton. Pierre Berton was particular about but Farley Mowat and someone like Margaret Atwood also, they would wait to see what we would present to them, and if it was something they couldn't live with, then we would go back to the drawing board, or we'd massage it somehow. But they still had final say, and they were not as vocal about what they wanted or didn't want, but it was about pleasing them. And also you were thinking, that's the other thing, is the bigger the name, the less you got to have an input as a designer, because you were trying to get something that not only pleased the authors, but pleased a mass market. It couldn't be quirky, you couldn't test the waters with design. It had to be really appealing to a wide market. And also things like, the bigger the author, the bigger the name.
The bigger the name on the cover?
Yeah, physically.
Yeah.
Pierre Berton, if you look at Pierre Berton's old books, his name is pretty large on these covers. So you have to balance that with an image. There's usually an image of some sort on a cover. It was a bit of a dance depending on who, but as a designer, it's more fun working on a smaller author, because then you can flex your design muscle a little bit more.
What was some of your favorite books while you were with M&S?
Like I said, I did enjoy working on the smaller titles. I had to redesign the NCL.
These are the ones that Frank started off in the late 50s.
Yes, and every, I don't know how often, but I would guess maybe every 8 to 10 years, they would need a revamp, because they would look dated. So when I was there, we did a revamp, and I know when I left, they did a couple of years later they revamped it. So that was a fun series to work on, because we used Canadian art. So I got connected with the galleries. I could order things. We actually hired someone to do the research. So for me, it was really creative. You got to see really interesting artwork. And
It was an education for you.
Yes, it was. It was an education. I really enjoyed that.
Because for the ones that Frank Neufeld originally designed, they were line drawings of the authors primarily.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And I guess the series got progressively. There were more and more authors added every year, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know how many there are now.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how many. Because they sell, I think it's educational. They sell them to
New
school.
Canadian Library? Is that
That's it. You got it. That's it. The New Canadian Library. Yeah.
That's a big project, though, if there's that many books that you have to...
They keep doing them. You get, a certain number per season. So you would... Not only are you redesigning the covers, you're redesigning, you're typesetting all the books inside. So you have to create a look for that, because they all have to look the same inside. So every season we would have a handful to work on. For me, one of the interesting things was working with illustrators, because in those days, this is before computers, we had to commission artwork or photography, and the rule was, if it's fiction, we're commissioning an illustration. If it's non-fiction, we're commissioning a photograph, or putting an author. So there was that communication with artists. And
that's for the cover, or for throughout the books?
For covers mostly.
Okay.
There would be photography inside, but not always. A lot of the books was running text.
Yeah.
There were a few picture books, but that's something that I don't do that much anymore. It was commissioning artwork because everything is pretty much, you can get everything online, or you do it yourself.
You mean through the stock photo?
Yeah, stock photo, stock illustration. The internet has many options.
So there's less of a personal interaction with creative artists.
That's right. And there's and also not the budget. There was a budget for illustration and photography. As a freelancer, I don't have the same kind of budgets, and part of my challenge is always to find affordable visuals, and that's with computers. Things like Photoshop. I studied illustration, so I come from that medium, right? So now with Photoshop, I can collect photographs and I can create images that are personal. I work for the book that are original within my budget, and for me, it's become creative because I get to flex my muscle in that, not just typography anymore.
So it's not all bad then.
No, it's not
at all.
No. The transition from before computers, I guess it's BC to AC after computers.
Sure.
There's been an arc. It started in the late 80s, early 90s, and the past 30 years I've had to learn, and everyone's had to learn and adjust and find a way to make it work for you as a designer. And I think it works really well because sure you have to put the effort in to learn everything, all the programs and figuring out things out. But it opens up a whole lot. Your palette is bigger. You get more to choose from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go back to BC. Any other books that stand out for you that you either just had an interesting time working on, or that you think are particularly beautiful, or if there were sort of extra attention paid to them because they were special books? Or I'm thinking from the perspective of a collector here.
I'd have to. There were a lot of books. For some reason, I don't remember doing a lot of coffee table books or picture books at M&S, and I don't know whether it was because we were using freelancers, 'cause those take a lot of time, and an in-house person doesn't always have the time to produce, and those are the kind of books that become nice books to look at, and coffee table books, and people treasure them. From before computers, I think I'm having a hard time pinpointing. Afterwards, there might be a few more in there in the list.
Anything else about your time at M&S that you think is worth talking about?
It's a great place. It was a great place to learn a lot really fast. But working as an in-house person and I ended up, when Rick left, I was the art director. I then had 2 other designers I was responsible for. It kind of took away from being able to design and having the responsibility of being the art director isn't just, it's managing the department. And when I became a freelancer, I really appreciate, that's one of the reasons I became a freelancer, is I wanted to go back to becoming just focused on being a designer and not having to deal with the meetings and the personalities and someone saying, I don't like brown, I've never liked brown. So like what do you do with that, right? So as a freelancer, they treat you differently than when you're in the house.
More respect, I guess.
Yes, more respect. And there's a bit of a distance. They can't just walk into the art department and say, do this. They treat you differently as a freelancer.
What about just finally on M&S? Some of the personalities. Can you comment on any?
Without getting into trouble.
Yeah. All right. You can get into trouble. That'd be good too.
Well, when I was there were M&S was shifting because Abby Bennett had purchased the company. Abby was not from a publishing background, so he saw things from a business point of view. He hired Adrienne Clarkson, who herself was not from a publishing. So she had a point of view, and she has ambitions, but ambitions that probably costed a bit more money than was affordable. And then there were the people who were always, they had Doug Gibson, who had his own imprint. And then there was Alan Seligman, who was an fabulous editor. So I just named all very strong personalities. For me, trying to navigate who to listen to, how do I get things done, how do I...
Because they all had slightly different...
Yes. And then also they all didn't all get along. There was some friction between themselves, and then also another big part of being in-house is marketing. In those days, marketing had a lot of sway. If you came to a...
I think they always have.
They always have. And you'd go into a meeting to present covers, and marketing would just, slam something down, not really realizing the time and effort and thought that had gone into getting to that point.
So that's another reason to become a freelancer.
That's it. You put a lot of effort in, and with just one word, no, I don't like it. It just gets thrown out. So it can be a little frustrating. Mm-hmm. But like I said, you learn a whole lot really quickly. I also made some friends, and one of the best friends I have is Bernice Eisenstein. She was the associate editor with Ellen Seligman. And her and I, we actually left together at the same time as freelancers, her as an editor and myself as a book designer. We rented a space together in Mirvish Village, which is no longer around. And we were together in the studio for a year, figuring out how to be freelancers, and we're still good friends.
It must have been fun.
It was a nice learning curve. Yeah.
So what did you learn?
I learned how to be a freelancer. You have to... One of the nice things about M&S, I left with a chunk of work. So I really didn't have to hustle, become a freelancer, and all of a sudden start knocking on everybody's door. They gave me a chunk of work for a year. And in that time, I was able to build up other clients. So that was really kind of them.
Whose doing was that?
I think when I told them that I was leaving, they were kind.
Who's they though?
Well, it would be Doug Gibson, because I don't think Adrian had left by the time I left. So it was Doug and Avi and the production person. They still needed someone to design at a certain level, and until they got the new person on board and running the whole place, I was sort of a buffer. Mm-hmm. So it helped them as much as it helped me. But being a freelancer for the first time, clients, billing, and once again, it's still before computers, so we're drafting table and figuring how we were dealing with typesetters. I had to commission Cooper and Beatty. You had to order type. You had to figure out how to do comps by hand, not on a computer. And
can you define specifically what a comp is?
A design. It is what the idea of what the cover could be.
So you do several of them?
Yes, mm-hmm. I never do one. I do a minimum of 3 ideas. I try to find 3 directions, and then that point, you present to the client, and the client will choose one, or they'll say, I really like this one, but can we change the type, or maybe the color, or something? We'll massage it, and then once it's approved by everyone, then it becomes the cover. Nowadays, we produce things for the catalog, for the internet. You have to produce a file that will work on multiple levels. Okay. And then you wait to finish the book when it's in full production. So
you decided as a freelancer to maintain your focus on being a book designer.
I think so. I think that's all I felt like I knew. I didn't really go to school for design. I learned on the job, and I think I was still learning.
So why did you stay focused on books?
I love books. I studied book illustration. I focused in college on that. I think Frank was a huge factor. He was so talented and so passionate about it. I love books, and I loved illustration, and I learned to love typography through Frank, and I continued along the way to learn how to do that.
So why do you love books?
I've always loved to read, and I think it's a continuation of it. It's personal. It's also connecting with the written word. When I get a manuscript, I'm eager to read it, eager to understand what this book is about. And then the challenge as an artist is, or as a designer, is how do I create a cover, or how do I lay out the interior? Because I don't just do, we've been talking about covers, but I do the interiors also. And how do I make it so that the reader appreciates? Because it's not about me, the designer, it's really about producing a book that the readers will want, or once they in it, they get swept away, and you enhance the words more than anything else. You don't take away from it. And design isn't really supposed to. And that's the other thing about book design, especially interior. It's not supposed to be splashy. It's not supposed to say, "Here I am." It's supposed to say, "Here's the book. Here's the words, and or the pictures that go with it." And if you pay too much attention to the design, you've actually taken away from the book, which is, I think, a no-no. So there's a balance all the time. And it's also about control and creativity together. To do a book, you have to be organized, because you can't organize 300 pages and not be organized, because you also have to work with pictures, you have to work with a manuscript, an editor, copy editor. And if you mess up, tons of hours of work have gone out the window. So yeah, you have to, there's a balance, a yin and yang maybe, control, creativity, understanding the written word.
You want to enhance, but you don't want to
show off,
attract.
Yeah, to the design.
Mm-hmm.
But people who understand design, or people who like it, will notice it. And then people who don't, that's okay, as long as you made the book more enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember someone asking me, well, what do I do for a living?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm a book designer. And they said to me, someone actually does that?
Yeah, right.
I
never noticed.
What exactly do you do? Mm. And then when I opened it up and I showed them, oh, so they had never really noticed it, but they were readers.
So is that a good thing? That's a good thing, or?
It's a good thing if you don't annoy a reader.
Yeah, that's a pretty low bar though.
But have you ever read a book and something just annoys you? One time I was just reading a fiction book, and there was the way they'd handled the folio. Every time I turned the page, it would jump out at me. So I would stop reading. So I felt that was an annoyance. Yeah. So those are the things that are not good. Mm-hmm. But if it's, it's smooth and you can have a few bells and whistles, you don't want to show off. But then the cover is in itself, that has a whole different.
That does have to attract.
That has to attract. So there you go. There you can fluff your feathers a bit as a designer, but then you still have to be true to the book somehow, and you have to please the marketing people, all right? And you have to please the author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you became a freelancer and you did a lot of work with M&S, but you also went after other clients. Mm-hmm. Who else did you get?
One of the earlier clients that was good to me, we worked for a while, is Doubleday Canada. And I think it was because the production person who had worked at M&S was working for them, and that was my contact, and I got in that way.
Who's that?
It was Maggie Reeves. Maggie for sure. We worked together. And I think that's the other nice thing about publishing, is when you're in and you have people that like working with you, they stick with you. It's not like advertising where you can piss someone off or a client doesn't like you and they no longer hire you. In publishing, is if you get a relationship going, like I was doing with Doubleday, with this person, with Maggie. We worked for a while, I think over 5 years, but then she left, and the new person came in, and I was out the door.
They were giving business to their friend.
That's it. Yeah. So, but I've had clients that I've had for years, which is we build a relationship, and in every season they're going to call you up and give you a couple books, and it keeps going that way.
Any books stand out for you in the first couple of years of freelancing?
Oh God. When you design so many books, I can barely sometimes.
How many do you design per year?
Per year, it depends if I have some coffee table books, because they take a fair amount of time. But I probably design covers, maybe 20 covers a year, and then approximately 3 to 5 picture books a year, and they can take months, and that's probably what I do now. I probably worked more earlier on. I had more time, but now I'm slowing down. It's hard to remember all the books. Like, I didn't do a whole lot of picture books back then. I think, once I left as a freelancer, I did work a lot for Doubleday. I didn't work for a whole lot of the big houses. It's harder to work for the bigger houses. They had an in-house art department, and they don't use freelancers as much. So I started working with smaller publishing houses. Like over 10 years ago, I started working with ECW Press with Jack David.
How did you get that contract or contact?
I think someone passed my name along. That's usually how I get work. Someone mentions my name.
And then what? You went in and showed off your portfolio?
Yeah, and then he gave me actually, there's one book there. It's Too Close to the Falls by Catherine Gilmore, I think. That's the last name. Anyway, it was a big book for them. It did really well. For a small press, it did really well. And
what's it about?
It's a memoir. It's a memoir of her life. There's 3 of them, but that's the first one. And she's a young girl, a young teenage girl living around Niagara Falls. So it's called Too Close to the Falls. She had a odd family, not dysfunctional, but odd family. It's a charming book, and that was one of the first books I did for Jack. I really enjoyed it. It did really well. It sort of cemented my.
So if it sells well, that's good cement, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the door for a few more covers, and I did a lot of books with them. I enjoyed working with ECW because they themselves did a variety of books. They do a lot. They have a category of entertainment kind of books. I did a book with them called Chicago Blues. It's a picture book. And they were black and white photographs from a certain time period. They were just gorgeous photographs, and I really enjoyed working on that. There were 2 of them. So with ECW, I started to get a nice variety of books, not just fiction and nonfiction, picture books. I worked with Neil Peart. Neil Peart has done a few books with them, and I did the interiors.
He's the
Rush Fellow. The
yes.
drummer,
Yeah.
He's done a number of books. I haven't done all of them, but he started doing some books. Once again, he does sort of memoir, travel. And
did you work directly with him or not?
At certain points, he has someone does his covers, and I think it's someone who works on his album covers.
Sure, yeah.
But the interior I was working on. Yes, I did communicate with Neil via email, but once again, I'm not the point person, the editor is, but we were still...
Yeah.
He was involved.
You did the fine-tuning?
And laying out the interior of the book. Yeah. I did a number of picture books for ECW, and I enjoy that. You get to be with the book for a little longer, and you get the visual part.
What do you like so much about Jack, then?
Jack David? He's unassuming, but he's a smart guy. He's always got a story. He's very entertaining, but not in a showy way. You could sit in the bar and have a beer with him, and he can tell you endless stories about you. Just say a word, and he's got a story for it. And he's just a nice guy, and he's always been very kind to me that way. And he's almost like an angel. He's always passing my name along, and so I can't not like him. But he's a nice person, and his publishing house is lovely. It's like a family. They look after each other, and they treat their freelancers that way. They look after them. Sometimes you just as a freelancer, one day you're there, and next day you're not, and you don't even know why. You haven't really done anything. So someone gets hired, and you're no longer
part of the family.
And you don't know where that came from, and so all of a sudden you have to find somebody else.
It sounds quite a contrast to those big egos bouncing around at M&S while you were there.
The powers, yeah, it is. And I think that's, as a freelancer, I've learned to appreciate the smaller houses for that quality. I work with Cotto books. They're in...
Oh, Regina?
Yeah. Yeah, and they're just the same, they're...
Who runs that one?
Well, this changed. It had, when I first there was Nick, I forget the last name. He was the editor-in-chief or publisher, that would be it. And now it's John, I don't know the last name.
Okay.
I think it's a non-profit.
Oh.
Or it's a co-op, something like that.
That makes sense for Saskatchewan.
Yeah. And every season I get a handful of books. I work closely with a production person who also typesets, Susan Buck, and we get along really well. And it's just that's what you want when you work. You want to get the project, do what you do, and get it done, and not the stress of it. You're not worrying about someone being upset.
Yeah.
Because it's the wrong color or something. So I work with them. I've also started working with Fernwood.
I'm not familiar with them.
They're in Halifax. They have an office in Halifax, and they have an office in mid Canada somewhere, Manitoba or someplace like that. And I work with Bev Roche. She's the editor.
And what do they specialize in? Anything, or
a little bit of everything.
General, yeah.
They do fiction and nonfiction, and that's what they give me, a little bit of both. And then recently I don't normally do children's, but I've started doing work with Anik Press. And they're also...
They're in Toronto?
They're in Toronto, just north of the 401. Mm-hmm. And they do kids' books. They do lovely kids' books and a variety of books. And I've been doing some picture books for them. And it's been really a nice experience.
Well, you've put aside a number of books now. What was the criteria you used to pick those books? Books
that I enjoyed being with, for a certain amount of time. And when you work on them, you work on a computer. Mm-hmm. So there's a disconnect from a physical product. And when you finally get the book in the mail and you open it up and you still like it, that's a huge criteria, because sometimes I get the book and I go, oh my God, what did I do? What was I thinking?
You don't tell anyone.
No, God, no. It's only just being really picky. But there's a disconnect, but when you get that physical, and I think that's what's nice about a book. You feel it.
Well, I was just talking to a really successful Irish author, Emer McBride.
Okay.
And it took her 9 years to get published. And it was a small publishing house that published her first book, 1,000 copies. But her real dream was just to get that physical book in her hands. Yeah. Now that book went on to win some incredible prizes. Or at least the number of prizes was incredible. It won the Goldsmith Award and what used to be the Orange Prize, the Faber Memorial. It just won. But anyway, as I say, I think her thrill was as much, obviously, to have the prizes was a thrill, sort of a vindication, but it was the physical book in your hand.
Yeah.
So, well, let's put some of those in our hands then.
Okay. Well, one of my all-time favorites is I Was a Child of the Holocaust Survivors by Bernice Eisenstein.
And that is an M&S book.
It's a book that I did as a freelancer. I mentioned earlier that Bernice was an associate editor at McClelland and Stewart, and her and I left together. But she wrote a book later on, and M&S decided to publish it. And Bernice is not only a writer, but she's also an illustrator.
Oh, so these are her illustrations.
That's it, yeah.
Right on the cover, too.
Yeah, right on the cover.
That's kind of a depiction of her as a little girl?
Yeah, and then the shadow of her parents.
Oh, that's cool, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was my input. That's the only input I had on the cover.
Okay.
And so it was a labor of love, and Bernice is a close friend, but it was a book that required a lot of attention.
Yeah, and why is that?
Because, well, a lot of discussion happened about everything, not only how it's written, but how the book looks.
Right.
This is a book about Holocaust survivors, and Bernice, we talked about the end papers. It's a gray paper with silver. The portraits of a lot of people are on the end papers are printed in silver, so it's almost like a ghost. It's almost like
these are dead people, I assume.
Family dead people, yes.
People that were got murdered in the Holocaust.
Well, this is a memoir, so it's her family, people that are special to her. I don't know everybody in this, but it is a collage of people that she knows.
And they're all her drawings.
They're all her drawings.
Right.
But the way we produced it, it has a iridescent quality about it.
I was going to say, it's as you open it, you see that.
Yes, we see that.
And look at this on the cover, or at the actual front cover of the book.
On the case, on the inside, on the front case, we embossed the girl, her.
The line drawing.
A line drawing. So there's a connection to the cover. And then also everything from color. You see the yellow is the yellow that we used on the head and tail bands, the little pieces of cloth on the spine.
That yellow is picked up in the title on the front dust jacket.
Yes, and so there's a continuity, and including the paper. The paper is choosing the paper.
Kind of a cream color.
Cream color. It all feels the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the book is very personal. So the typography was important. Finding the right fonts.
It's almost like a graphic novel,
it's
but
a bit of there's a hint of graphic novel quality to it, and because it's a memoir, we used part of the fonts once it's script.
These are all her drawings.
These are all her drawings,
and you basically laid all of this out.
But everything had to fit properly.
Right. There's a chicken.
A chicken
or a rooster.
I think this is about food. This might be a chapter about food. Yeah.
Oh yeah, fish.
Yeah. So this book.
Wow.
It was a labor of love. It took a long time, but it came out beautifully. Bernice did very well with it. It was sold around the world in different languages. So the files themselves were sent. People would buy the files, and this book was typeset in German. It was typeset in all kinds of languages, so people had to still had to feel the same way. I have copies
in different languages.
Yeah. And it was done first as a hardcover, and then later on we did it as a paperback with French flaps.
Oh, nice. I always like French flaps on paper.
Yes.
Oh, and you maintain the silver.
We did it. A sort of fake
on
paper.
gray.
Yes, on gray, the silver. I think it was a special book for everyone, even including M&S. It won an award too, the Canadian Jewish Book Award. So that was it's one of my favorites. Always.
And what year? That was 2006?
6. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So what's next?
We'll move to Helen Humphrey. This is a
Kingston writer.
Kingston writer. The subject takes place just north of Kingston. She spends her time at her cottage, and the book is called The River, and it's all related to the river and her observations, whether it be about the landscape, about the animals, and then they are interspersed with stories, these sort of fiction stories that help enhance what this area is about.
It's a bit smaller. What is there a name for that size of book?
It's not. I don't know if there's a name for it, but it's more intimate because it's so small. It's in your hand.
Like a diary.
Almost like a little journal.
Journal. Yeah.
I think, and that was a decision we talked about with the publisher. This is ECW. I'm trying to find these little stories are in here.
Yeah, sweet.
So the little stories.
Charming.
Yeah, charming. So the little stories have to look different than the real, because it's fiction and non-fiction blended into one book.
Oh, okay. So you got photographs in one and illustrations in the other. Yeah.
And the non-fiction is always on a white paper, and then the stories have a colored background.
Kind of a greenish.
Greenish tinge, and the way they open up, the stories always look the same way.
Lots of little birds and flowers and grass and trees.
Very natural. Yeah. So once again,
and lots of color.
It's color throughout.
Yeah.
It has a lovely end papers. And then the cover itself is a bit different. We printed full color on the case itself,
Mm-hmm.
and then we did a translucent jacket where only the type, so you can sort of see through.
Yeah.
So it feels like water. So like, you know,
Oh, yeah.
so that transparency, you're feeling like the river
Mm-hmm.
underneath. There's more to what's just on top. So it has more conceptual, and maybe people don't notice it, but the effort is there. So if you notice it, great. If you don't, it's still beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what year was that one?
It's not so far ago. 2015, fairly recent. And then here's one, the Annick Press. This is the children's book called Turtle Island, where I got to flex my illustrative muscle a little bit more than normal. We're looking at the cover right now. I couldn't find a cover that sort of said what the book was about. And Turtle Island is the story of North America's first people. So it's an indigenous history.
Mm.
First of all, it's a minefield of what do you put on the cover.
And also the fact that you're white or
Yeah.
you're not Aboriginal.
That's right. I'm not. I have to be careful. You're covering a lot, indigenous, so you can't focus on one particular. So there were a lot of challenges even before I even started. But I did produce a number of covers for them to think about.
Were the authors Aboriginal or not?
One of them is
Okay.
Eldon Yellowhorn, and then Kathy Lounger is. So there's two authors on this project. But the book is called Turtle Island, so that in itself is a good starting point, and that's where I worked. But the thing is, I could not find an image that worked, one particular image. So I had to actually create the cover that I have. There are at least 5 images here to create this one image. And
So where'd you get the images from?
the internet mostly. Some of them are from stock agencies,
Okay.
and some of them, there are now a number of sites where you can get high quality without having to pay for rights, because photographers just want their work out there.
Mm-hmm. As long as you credit them.
Correct them. So this landscape back here and the sky, those are royalty-free images. I purchased that. You can purchase that.
You purchased the moon
I purchased the
and
moon,
a crow.
the crow, and the turtle.
The top of the turtle.
So there's 5 images here, and those you pay for, but you don't pay. There's royalty-free images like iStock and Shutterstock, and you don't pay more than $30 an image. So when it's all put together, it's an original image. It doesn't cost you $500,
Yeah.
right?
And you colored them the way you wanted to.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All of this is playing with
Mm-hmm.
in Photoshop. We nowadays most designers work either in design, which is where we typeset. Photoshop is where we do the images. There's another a program called Illustrator, which is more illustrative. You can do other things with it. So there's a combination of programs that, if you work with them together, you have a lot of flexibility.
Do you prefer working with today's tools versus BC?
before
computers, or which do you prefer?
If you had asked me in the 90s, I would have said, heck no, I don't like the computer, because you have to think back. That's when Apple started. The original computers were not limited, but it was a learning curve for everybody. And I think for me, the learning curve took a while to finally embrace and love. But the more we got into it, and the more that was offered to us, it became more interesting, and it gave you more things to work with and enhanced your design. So yes, at the beginning it was a challenge, but now the internet opened things up a whole lot. And I think also photographers and illustrators are now engaged in showing their work, and you have access to a whole lot more. Not only can you buy photography, you can you have illustration. It's how you all put that together that is interesting. And then we also have access. We can see everybody's work. You can go on Instagram and you can follow a book designer. You can follow a publisher. You can actually see what's going on. I used to, when I was trying to stay up on, you always want to see what everyone is doing. The only way I could do it was to go into a bookstore.
All right.
Now I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Now
Wait a minute. You need to go into bookstores though.
I do. Okay.
Yeah.
But you still
And buy stuff.
buy stuff and just walk around and just sniff the paper.
Yeah.
Going into a library or going into a bookstore, you cannot not love doing that, right? That's how I would see what everyone else was doing. But now I can just go on my computer. I can go on Pinterest. I can go on Instagram. Everybody's posting their work, even if it's not they themselves. Somebody else is admiring it.
So it's convenience as much as anything.
It is, but we also are more educated. Everyone sees what everyone else is doing. You can admire it. You can be influenced by it. You can be. You can go, wow, I really like that, or what were they thinking?
And plus, if you want to, you can connect and communicate with them
that's
too.
That's right. Yeah, you
very easily.
And same thing. Not only other designers, but photographers and illustrators. You can see who's in your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I just recently moved to the Kingston area. And that's one of the first things I did is on Instagram, I started following people, illustrators, anybody who's around who's in my field of work, because one day you never know.
Yeah.
You could connect somehow. I think computers are here to stay, and if you want to fight it, you can, but it's, So, but at Turtle Island,
sure.
The nice thing about this book is it was a design challenge from not just the cover, from also the interior. There was a photo researcher for the actual, because all the photographs the pieces have to be authentic. It has to work. Like if I'm showing a boat that to work with copy, it has to be the right kind of boat.
Someone's gonna notice.
Yes.
But that's the case with all books, isn't it?
But that's an educational book, so It's going into schools. It has to be
extra.
Yeah.
Careful. Yeah. Okay.
And that's the thing about publishing is they're held responsible. They check everything. The editors, the copy editors, they have to get permission for everything. People don't, I think, underestimate how much work goes into a book from a manuscript to something in your hands, and how many people have a say in there. And it's important
to get it right.
Because
I suppose you could get sued if you don't get
that's
it
right.
right.
You get sued. I can remember one time I worked on a book and we had to take it off the shelf because something wasn't checked properly, and they were being threatened to be sued. So that was a lot of work that went into a book that never got sold. So because right now, you think of the internet, everybody can go up there and write something, and no one double checks it, nobody fact checks it.
Yeah.
You can't get away with that when you print it on paper.
That's one very good reason to read books instead of stuff you find on the internet.
And believe everything you read, right? That was the other thing that has changed a lot with the publishing industry is the ebook. It was introduced maybe 10 years ago?
Maybe 10, yeah. I'd say maybe a little longer.
Yeah, when it first came out, the fear, oh my God, what's going to happen to reading? What's going to happen to the physical book? People are going to lose their jobs. And none of that has happened. It actually enhanced the... Yeah,
they kind of complement each other.
That's right.
Yeah.
People who wouldn't take a book on a holiday can all of a sudden take a couple books on a holiday, and they'll pay for them. So, publishing still makes money. Even though you buy an ebook, doesn't mean it's not produced as a physical. People still this generation, maybe a couple decades from now, I don't know, we'll see. But we all want a physical book somehow.
I know I do. And so what's this physical book?
This is a book I did called Written in Blue and White. It's the Toronto Maple Leafs Contracts and Historical Documents.
It's a big book.
It's a big book. It's
coffee table.
Coffee table, gift book. It's the kind of book you give as a gift to a hockey fan.
All sorts of old documents.
Old documents.
Letters and...
that's what I like about designing books is I work on books that I would not normally be drawn to.
Yeah, it's education, isn't it?
It's educational. Yeah. And, this is an example. But when I look at this stuff, not only is the content is interesting, but it's design. The look of this.
I like the way you've actually taken this. What is this? This is an invoice.
An invoice.
Yeah.
But just to look at the invoice.
The actual invoice.
The typography of the invoice.
Yeah.
There was the handwriting, Not only are we looking at the content, there's a visual component that's just as exciting.
Yeah.
And the paper, people used to use a typewriter. And it makes you think about another time and place. It draws you in. And these pictures,
Tim Horton.
There he is, that's right. So I learned about something I would not normally have known about.
That's another good reason to explanation for why you're a book designer.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I've done a number of hockey books. Being
You a hockey fan or not?
You're not. I hate to say that. Not a huge hockey fan. No.
Well, these days there's so many teams,
That's right.
How do you keep track?
Yeah. I'm a fan when once we get into finals and we get all excited.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I'm a fan as long as the team I'm cheering for is winning. If they're not, then I don't want to watch.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Any other thoughts about the practice of designing books and covers that you want to leave listeners with?
No. To be totally honest.
We don't have to. I can cut this.
Okay.
To be totally honest.
Well, deep down inside, I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
And I like coming to my desk in front of my computer and working on something that's, you're sharing it, but you're alone and you're doing it. People come to you, like the editor, you'll have a company. But it's a real intimate, quiet practice. You're sitting there, you're paying attention. I hate to use the word meditative because when I'm in it, like when I'm laying out a book, or I'm working on a cover, when I'm thinking about it, and I'll look up and I go, oh God, a whole hour has gone by.
Yeah.
And I may not have done a whole lot.
You're in the zone.
You're in the zone, and that's when I feel okay.
You're doing the right thing.
I'm doing the right thing because I'm not angry that I had to do this or I got to get to my desk and do it. Sure, sometimes it gets crazy and schedules can be a little hectic. But the idea of designing books is pleasant. It's like it's part of the person I am. That maybe ties back to when I was in college, when they asked you what major do you want to do, I thought to myself, I love books so much. That's where I want to be. And that's sort of how it's just always progressed. I never would have thought I would have been a book designer. But that decision back then was who I was, and it's still who I am today. And they kind of fit, And that's why maybe I'm a freelancer as opposed to working in-house, because I'm that introverted person who would just prefer just to sit and work. And then, maybe.
On your own terms.
Yeah. And you can get up and take a break. But yeah.
Keep your pajamas on.
I don't do that.
Good.
I'm not one of those.
No.
I have to get dressed. I have to
go to the office.
Yes, I have. I actually say that to my husband. I said,
Yeah.
And he knows he's not going to bother me for the next 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
Because once you're in the zone, and that's the only way you do it. Otherwise, you're not really working, right? Yeah.
Well, congratulations on picking an area that's specialized and making a living at it. That's excellent.
I've been
admirable.
And lucky. You think back, when did I make that decision? It sort of just fell into place slowly, and you just kept going down that path, and kind of happy that it worked out that way. And I think about, people say, when are you going to retire? And I just go, I don't know.
No, this is my life.
I like it. I like it. I like being creative. Maybe I wish I was maybe working less hours and so I could do something else creative. But the idea of not doing books hasn't quite sunk in yet. But that's the same thing like Frank Neufeld. I think Frank designed books way into past 65, right?
Yeah.
And I think maybe book designers are like that. People who love books, and you don't quit. No. You don't quit. How do people find me? Oh.
Don't you want them to find you? I mean, do you have a website?
I don't.
Okay.
That's one of those things every once in a while, sometimes you get a lull in your schedule and you go, oh gosh, I'll never work again. And then you say, oh, maybe I should have a website, and you contact a friend and then someone calls you up and gives you a work. So
maybe you don't want people knowing where you are. That's perfectly fine too.
I don't mind. I'm on LinkedIn. That's people who hear my name. I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I have a page on Instagram that shows it, and I just did that in January. That's the closest I have to a website is some images on Instagram. And I'll listen to projects. I work with, like I said, I work with self-published authors. If there's the time and the money, then I'll listen. But
okay,
yeah,
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, it's been good listening to you.
Thank you for listening to me.
I've been speaking with Tania Craan at her home office just outside of Kingston, Ontario. Thanks again.
Thank you.